We may be under stress now, but we cannot afford to turn inwards.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says Singapore must not give the wrong impression to global investors that it's closing up.
And the incident of falling ventilation duct at a cinema raises questions about public safety in malls and what individuals can do in such a situation.
Hello, you're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong giving a major speech in Parliament today. He focused on a few key areas, including COVID-19 and foreign competition for jobs.
But first, on Singapore's political system, he warned against the tone of debate becoming toxic and bitter, like in many other countries.
I believe that it's good to have an adequate number of opposition MPs in Parliament. It keeps the government on its toes, but that does not mean that the more opposition MPs and the more fiery the debate in Parliament is, the better. Or that the tone of our political debate cannot change for the worse. At the most fundamental level, to make our politics work, both the government and opposition must share an overriding objective: to work for Singapore and not just for our party or our supporters.
Well, Singapore editor Zakir Hussain joins us to discuss PM Lee's address. So Zakir, on the subject of the adversarial dynamic in Singapore's parliament, has PM Lee's tone changed in how he paints the opposition from what he said in his speech as well as in the exchange with Pritam Singh immediately following his address?
I don't think so, actually. I think, since the general election, and I think even before PM Lee's remarks, as well as his actions, show that the government recognizes there is space for an opposition in Singapore politics. And, the legislative changes before the election to ensure a minimum of 12 elected opposition MPs, as well as the move to appoint Mr. Singh as leader of the opposition, as well as PM's remarks today, I think signal the recognition that Singapore voters do want an opposition, do want alternative voices in Parliament. And I think in PM's speech today, he sort of tried to frame it as the PAP having to cater to a greater diversity of views as well as to disagreements, but he also expressed the hope that this diversity and disagreement, could be channeled in a constructive way and not lead to polarization or to partisanship as we've seen in some other countries.
Right.
And I think even in the subsequent exchange with Mr. Pritam Singh, I think, yes, there were disagreements and there were differences. I think they were also viewed, I think, by many. So I think it's how that plays out. It remains to be seen.
We've heard from opposition members in Parliament in the past 3 days, including today. It's hoped that they'll bring more robust debate to Parliament. Do we see that, Zak?
I think we did. We saw some of that, especially over the first 2 days. Mr. Pritam Singh spoke at length, and yesterday, Workers' Party Chairman Sylvia Lim also made quite a bold speech, I thought, calling for a review of race-based policies. While her points have not been addressed yet, the debate, there's still 2 more days, actually 2.5 more days to the debate if you include the rest of this afternoon. And I think the debate has been, I think, quite more robust compared to previous parliaments. And I think the fact that there are double the number of opposition MPs played a part in that.
Right. Well, thanks, Zakir. Now, we still want to hear your thoughts on other parts of PM Lee's speech.
Right, so let's turn to the next point. PM Lee focused the government's approach to social safety nets and providing sustainable support to those who need it most.
He said that as a matter of principle, social safety nets should be paid for out of current revenues.
After several generations of frugal prudence, we have built up significant reserves. And because we have taken such an approach consistently, decade after decade, in this enormous monster storm, we've been able to draw on past reserves and fund our essential budget packages and help people on a very big scale. Now the opposition says, show me how much we have in the reserves before I decide whether I support your budget and tax plans. Let's have a look at the money. Basically, they're asking, I have something in the bank already. How much of that can I touch? This was not the attitude of our forefathers, the founders who were building for the future, but the attitude of inheritors who think they have come into a fortune and want to consume the fruits of their predecessors' labors. And this is fundamentally the wrong approach.
So Zakir, on the topic of the revenue, now leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh, spoke after PM Lee's speech to clarify the opposition's position. What do you make of this exchange between PM and Mr. Singh?
I think, this reflects, sort of almost, I wouldn't say unbridgeable, but I think the two different positions expressed. I think PM said, well, we have these reserves and we can't divulge the size for, safety reasons. But I think Mr. Singh said, they felt, the opposition felt it was needed. They felt that, more information on the reserves was needed for them to at least make informed decisions. I think you're not going to see this bridged anytime soon.
Right. Well, on the subject of social safety nets, what was PM Lee's broader message on that topic?
I think two key points. One is the fact that COVID-19's really, PM's point was that, really the best assurance, the best form of unemployment insurance, the best form of social safety net is really the assurance of a job and an actual job. But at the same time as COVID-19 has disrupted many industries and sectors, there is a need for social safety nets to be enhanced. And I think, you've got a slew of measures in place currently with COVID-19. After the pandemic's over in maybe a year or longer, I think some of these will still need to be adjusted. And I think that there is a need for Singapore to seriously consider some of these. PM also made the point that I think we're not ideologically bound to any concept or scheme, but one key approach is, I think, to make sure that whatever measures you take are sustainable and viable.
Now, PM Lee also spent a good portion of his speech on the hot button issue of foreign talent.
Right. He said Singapore must not give the wrong impression that the country is closing up and no longer welcoming foreigners.
The government will always be on the side of Singaporeans. What is the point of creating jobs for foreigners if it doesn't benefit Singaporeans? Why would we want to do that? Ultimately, our aim is to grow the economy, create good jobs for Singaporeans, and raise our standards of living. Foreign workers and work pass holders help us to achieve this. By being open to talent from all over the world, we create more opportunities for ourselves.
Well, local and foreign employment have become a hot button issues since the Manpower Ministry announced the raising of the qualifying minimum salaries for EP and S-Pass holders. And this may lead to fewer foreigners working in Singapore. So Zakir, how will this affect our status as a metropolitan city, a hub that is interconnected with the rest of the world?
I think there is quite valid concern that some of these measures could be seen by others as Singapore sending a signal that it's no longer as welcoming as it was. And I think in his speech, PM did make the point that there's a need to make sure that this signal doesn't get sent, because quite a lot is at stake. For instance, a lot of foreign investors are still interested in putting their operations and expanding their presence in Singapore. And although some of this will entail bringing in, perhaps foreigners in key positions to run them, at the same time, they also create a significant number of jobs for Singaporeans. And in this current climate, I think this is not something to be scoffed at.
All right. And are we running the risk of becoming insular if we limit the number of foreigners working here?
I think so, which is why I think in recent days as well, you saw Manpower Minister Josephine Teo saying it was unwise to have a quota on the absolute numbers of, say, EP holders. Singapore's always thrived on being open and connected to the world. And I think one point that was also raised yesterday and today is that, this openness has actually enabled Singaporeans to hold key leadership positions in some of these global banks and MNCs around the world. And I think PM did highlight a couple of them who were able to benefit, by Singapore's openness, and they now hold key positions abroad.
Right. Now on to Singapore's COVID-19 response. Prime Minister Lee said that with hindsight, the government would have done some things differently. For example, recommending everyone to wear face masks sooner than it did, and acting more aggressively and sooner on the migrant worker dormitories.
Also, bringing Singaporeans home from abroad in March. The government would have quarantined all of them earlier instead of only those returning from certain countries.
We must learn from these errors and do better the next time. But in the fog of war, it's not possible always to make the perfect decisions. Yet we have to decide and move. We cannot afford to wait. The key is to watch things closely, learn from experience, and adapt our responses promptly as new information emerges and as the situation changes.
Now, Zakir, PM Lee acknowledging the lapses in our COVID-19 response, like not foreseeing the outbreak in the dorms, as well as not mandating the wearing of face masks earlier. Does it signal a shift in how the new government is managing the pandemic and even future crises?
I think not really. I think the principles are still the same. In the fog of war, there needs to be certain decisions that have to be made. And I think, as PM pointed out, in this case, the politicians fronted and explained the rationale for the decisions they made at that time. And I think it's a tough situation. I think all countries around the world are grappling. Even in Singapore, we're not sure, even as we open up and loosen some of the restrictions, whether we'll see a second wave of cases. And I think these are some of the considerations that the government will continue to have to weigh. As we decide how much to open up and how much to, still have these health and safety measures in place, at least for some time.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Zakir. Always a pleasure to speak to you. We've been speaking to Singapore editor at the Straits Times, Zakir Hussain.
Now, PM Lee spoke for just under 90 minutes, and right at the very end, he was visibly emotional when he spoke about Singapore's continued fight against COVID-19.
Our economy will prosper anew. Our children and our grandchildren will continue marching forward to build a fairer, ever more just and equal society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Well, other highlights from Parliament today. Progress Singapore Party NCMP Hazel Phua called for a more needs-based approach to the job support scheme with a focus on struggling companies and Singaporeans. She also explored the possibility for CPF to be used in such times of need.
I urge a review of the unconditional GSS to explore clawing back GSS from companies that are still profitable and companies that continue to pay million-dollar executive salaries, and rechannel these resources to where they're more needed, like unemployment support. GSS for citizens and PRs should also be differentiated to underline the difference in the government's duty and obligations to these two groups. The first duty of any government is always to its own citizens. The CPF system works well for many Singaporeans. However, for those who are experiencing financial difficulties, it can be very frustrating to see their own savings trapped in an account they are unable to touch to help them ease the current situation. If we can allow ways for CPF members to rely on these savings in times of need, it will help build trust in the system and peace of mind.
Several MPs addressed the issue of inequality and the need for attention to be paid to the vulnerable in the economy, especially as Singapore faces the worst recession in its history.
Louis Ng and Carrie Tan pointed out that for women and mothers in particular, this downturn could hit harder.
On average, women earn $342 less than men for similar work. Our female labour force participation rate has stagnated for the past 5 years. Last year, it was 61%, far below the 77% for men. I know MOM is working hard to address this problem. Sir, one of the main causes of this problem is the assumption that women are supposed to take care of children.
Despite more and more women graduating from university with a degree, we still face the pressures and penalties that come with being a wife and a mother. According to research by Aware, women earn close to $550,000 less than their male counterparts over the course of a standard 40-year career. As we already know, the low fertility rate in Singapore has serious implications for our society. Less people working means a shrinking tax base, while we face rising healthcare costs due to our aging population.
On to the latest COVID-19 figures in Singapore. 49 new cases were confirmed today, taking the total count to about 56,900. They included 3 community cases, comprising 1 Singaporean and 2 work pass holders.
There were also 3 imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notices upon their arrival here. Now, more details will be announced tonight.
An AI-powered tool has been developed to detect abnormal chest X-rays quickly during COVID-19 screening in the National Centre for Infectious Diseases. Called ReadyLogic, the tool allows radiologists to report such cases in about 50 minutes after each patient completes the procedure. With rapid flagging of pneumonia cases, doctors can intervene earlier, as more severe findings on chest X-rays may mean an urgent need for supplemental oxygen therapy and ventilation for patients.
A 64-year-old man was charged earlier today over the Lucky Plaza crash last year that killed 2 domestic helpers. Malaysian Chong Kim Ho is now facing 3 charges for dangerous driving. His bail has been set at $15,000 and his pre-trial conference will be held on September 25th.
And jet setters have new ways to earn air miles even if they aren't catching as many flights as before. Singapore Airlines said frequent flyers under the KrisFlyer Elite program and Priority Passenger Services Club members will need to chalk up just half the PPS value or air miles previously required to maintain their membership. The remaining half required for membership renewal will be topped up by SIA. Now, this applies to memberships which will expire between March 2021 and February 2022.
The falling ventilation duct incident in a Shaw Cinema Hall at Next Shopping Centre last Sunday has raised questions about public safety in malls, as well as awareness on what one can do in such a situation. Now, questions like how accident happened, why the duct got dislodged, and who's liable in this instance remain unanswered.
That's right. Well, for a start, Shaw Theatres told the Straits Times yesterday that it's in the process of inspecting all of its cinemas at 6 other locations with their respective building managers. While the next branch is currently closed for investigations, all the other cinemas remain open. The Building and Construction Authority has also instructed the building owner to appoint an engineer to investigate Sunday's incident and assess the condition of the other ducts in the affected cinema hall.
Now, to take this further, we're joined by Justin Chan, Senior Partner and Head of Dispute Resolution Practice at law firm Tito Isaac Co. Welcome, Justin. Now, Justin, for starters, who is responsible for what has happened, and for building safety, is it the mall Next or Cinema Shaw liable in this instance?
Well, I think all things being equal, Shaw would be responsible for this particular incident. They are the occupiers of that particular space, and presumably until all the fact-finding has been done, they would also be responsible for the air conditioning ducts within the cinema and owe a duty of care to their patrons to ensure their safety. If, for example, it's found that the air conditioning ducts were caused by some structural issues or are in some way attributable to the building itself, it could be that Next Mall is responsible. There is a dark horse in this examination, though. I mean, in the context of the cinema, there could be a specialist air conditioning and mechanical ventilation contractor who's been contracted to do that job to maintain the ducts and has control over those ducts. So it's not unheard of for defendants in a particular suit to say there's an independent contractor involved and you should look to that independent contractor for any damage.
Well, as you know, there are unanswered questions still, like whether there were any design, installation or maintenance lapses, which likely only BCA's investigation can reveal. So Justin, the big question now is what is being done to prevent such incidents from happening again and to keep people safe as well? What's your view from the legal perspective? Well,
as you have seen, I think the first step would be to close all the cinemas, and I think that has been done, and to have a mandatory check for the maintenance issues and the condition of all the ducts. Going forward, I think contract would be a good way to prevent rather than cure. And I don't mean contract in the normal sense. I mean, we've all entered places that say enter at your own risk, but you can't contract out negligence. What you can do is employ a good contractor with a good track record, a good specialist contractor with a good track record, with warranties, who will warrant the condition and fitness of those air conditioning ducts and conduct regular maintenance and checks.
Right. Now let's talk about on the individual perspective. As a patron to any mall, who do I look to if I get injured? What is the legal recourse if any fixtures were to fall on me in any mall?
I mean, again, this is it's an unenviable position. We hope that those injured are recovering speedily. First things first, I think inform your insurer. If you have personal injury insurance, the first step is to inform your insurers that an accident has happened. Going forward, I think the question becomes, where were you injured? If you were injured in a particular shop, that shop would be liable, presumably for any damage caused to you. If you're in a common area, for example, be it lifts, corridors, things of that nature. In strata titled shopping centers, the MCST is usually in charge of those common areas, so they're the party to look towards. In non-strata titled, there's usually some kind of managing agent or association, and those are the people you look towards in those situations.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for the insights. Always a pleasure to speak with you. We were speaking to Senior Partner and Head of Dispute Resolution Practice at Tito Isaac Co, Justin Chan.
Let's take a look at the global headlines. Thailand has reported 100 days in a row without any locally transmitted COVID-19 infections. While new cases have been detected among arriving travellers, its health ministry said no community transmission has been recorded since May 26.
Taiwan announced that it would redesign its passport to give greater prominence to the island's name. This after Taiwan complained that its citizens have encountered problems entering other countries and being confused for China during the coronavirus outbreak. Taiwanese passports currently feature the English words Republic of China, its formal name at the top, with Taiwan printed at the bottom. The new passport will feature an enlarging of the word Taiwan in English and the removal of the words Republic of China, but the name in Chinese characters will remain. The new design is expected to come into circulation in January.
Former Cambodian leader Pol Pot's premier executioner and security chief has died at the age of 77. Known as Comrade Doik, Gang Kwek Yiv oversaw the mass murder of at least 14,000 Cambodians at the notorious Dual Slang prison. A United Nations tribunal had in 2010 found him guilty of mass murder, torture and crimes against humanity.
Organizers of the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics and Paralympics have unveiled a dynamic emblem for the upcoming events. Designed for the digital age, it blends portions of the traditional Olympics logo with an interchanging element to emphasize the city's diversity.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Kue. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.